Well, hello, I'm Mike Barra. I'm your host for this live stream episode titled Government UAP Files and How the Critics Got It All Wrong on Apollo. Welcome to the show. I wanted to come in and do this live stream today because basically we have a very serious problem in ufology. What we have is a few very untalented, unnotable people who unfortunately have a little bit of money and some influence, basically out there attacking the people who do have talent, do have knowledge, and should have the influence. And that's become an increasing problem as time has gone by. And it's gotten even worse since the death of David Wilcock. The very same people who cyberbullied and browbeat David Wilcock for the last 10 years of his life are now trying to make themselves out to be the good guys. And in doing so, they are spewing a bunch of lies and stupidity and absolute nonsense that can easily be refuted. So I am here to refute it today. Now, one of the things that's also happened that's been very important, besides the fact that ufology itself has become a clown show, is the fact that the government is now beginning to release what they are calling UFO files or investigatory files of objects and subjects that they have not been able to figure out. Now, this is really interesting stuff because a lot of it, as I told you last week when those files came out, relates to my work, which has been ongoing for over 30 years, and the work of my co-author on the book Dark Mission: The Secret History of NASA, Richard C. Hoagland. It does not reflect on the work of anyone else because those people are liars and idiots. So we're going to get into that today. One of the things that's really been important, though, is this release of the files has brought a lot more scrutiny to the entire ufology movement. And I think it's very important now that we filter out the bad actors from the good, and we will do the presentation and let people decide. What I want to talk about today is actually the moon. Back in 2014, 2013, 2012, I wrote a book called Ancient Aliens on the Moon, which was the basis for a NBC TV show, Aliens on the Moon: The Truth Exposed, which I starred in along with my friend Ken Johnston Jr. and some other experts on the moon, talking about what is really on the moon and what we do know and what we don't know about the moon. And that's recently become important. It was also featured in my New York Times best-selling book in 2007 with my co-author and mentor, Richard C. Hoagland, titled Dark Mission: The Secret History of NASA. So as we went through this research, one of the things that was really interesting and important to us was how would this all come out? How would we get it in front of the public? Well, it turns out we didn't need to because the government is doing it for us. Now, you're all aware of the government files that were released last week. They were, in some cases, very interesting, in some cases, rather easily explainable. As for instance, this object, quite clearly, which was in the files, is a blimp. It has a tail of a blimp. It has the fins on the back end. It has the shape of a blimp. It even has sort of a hanging crew cabin pod below the main balloon structure. Now, how that got in there, I really don't know. How it was not determined to be a blimp, I don't know. I think it's possible that part of what the government's doing with this disclosure, as it is, such as it is weeding out the retards from the smart guys. And unfortunately, most of ufology prove themselves to be of the R word vintage, not the smart guy vintage. And this is a prime example, I think, of some of the files that were in there that were just put in there to see if people knew what they were dealing with. Another one that is actually really important is this so-called chandelier UFO. Now, this got all kinds of play. It got all kinds of really it was all over the news. In fact, it was on the clips that I was on Fox News. I believe it was played on Russian TV, Russian TV show that I did a couple of days ago. And they talked about it as if this is a UFO. Now, if this were a real UFO, it would be very, very interesting and very, very scary and very, very weird because nobody's ever seen anything like this in the sky. Unfortunately, what you're actually looking at, if you can see you can actually see the sort of smoke trail behind it. And in other shots, and as you watch the video, a parachute clearly pops into the screen. This is a parachute flare. This is nothing more than a common military parachute flare, probably dropped from a helicopter or a fighter jet. And what you're seeing here in terms of the effect, the spiky effect, is you're actually seeing diffraction artifacts from the fact this is an infrared camera and getting a lot of bright heat energy back, which is wiping it out and kind of makes the camera and the graphics chip go into mommy mode and start putting out all sorts of diffraction spikes. And you're also seeing the heads up display targeting reticule combined. And that gives you this very interesting, weird sort of spiky effect. But it clearly is not a UFO, certainly not an alien spacecraft. I wonder if there's any chance I can get this video to play. I don't think so. Now, however, what was really interesting is images that were released from the moon, from Apollo photography. This is an example of one of the objects that was photographed in the sky above the side. I believe this is an Apollo 11 photograph. There are others from Apollo 12, and they show what tends to be this sort of blue shifted, bizarre light in the sky above the Apollo landing site. And the inset there that I put in there is another example from similar photography. And the frame numbers were all given in the presentations. Here's another photograph of the area where you see, again, more of these objects in the sky. And it's critical to understand that in real lunar photography, which did take place, the sky should be absolute black. The reason for that is that the foreground is so bright without any atmospheric diffraction that you immediately wash out any background objects. Stars are impossible to see because they are light years away and incredibly faint. And the average exposure time for the shutters on these cameras that were used, the Hasselblad cameras that were used on the surface of the moon, is about 1/250th of a second, which is far too short a time to actually expose any object that is millions of miles or light years distance. So whatever is on these photographs, as we go through them, whatever these objects are, they are local. Now, there are some dispute, which we will go through, about what they actually are, but they are local. There is no question that they have to be relatively close to the landing site, within a few miles, I would assume, a few hundred miles at the most, on the moon. They are not coming from somewhere else. They are not coming from deep space. They are not coming from another galaxy or another star system. Here's some more examples that were released in the Apollo photography that the government put out last week. Very interesting stuff, at least to me, because it confirms the work I've done with Richard Hoagland for more than 3 decades now. And here's another prime example of 3 small bright dots in the sky. I believe this might be Apollo 17, which should not be there. Now, of course, immediately the critics hit back on what this stuff is. These are just radiation artifacts on the film. See, little spikes of radiation shoot through the teeny tiny aperture on the camera and hit the film and cause these blue spots on the film. Okay, that's the first one. The second explanation is they are and I'm serious. This is, someone has actually proposed this. Front screen projection artifacts from Stanley Kubrick's fake moon landing footage. Yeah. Somebody really said that. Third, they are scanner artifacts. Oh, when they took the negatives and they scanned them, NASA had such shitty scanners to scan this stuff into a digitized form that it created all of these bright blob light artifacts on the film. Yeah, okay. Because NASA had the shittiest equipment out there. Well, as this presentation goes along, we are going to refute all three of these arguments because they're all false. However, especially the first one or the middle one, the Stanley Kubrick thing. If you have any doubt that the moon landings were real and not fake, if you are stupid enough to believe the lie that a certain individual has been pushing for 10, 15 years now, that Stanley Kubrick faked the moon landings, I would suggest you go to YouTube and go to the Y-Files channel, one of the most popular channels on YouTube, and check out the video that I co-wrote with AJ Gentili, the creator of the channel, called The Greatest Lie Ever Told, The Moon Landings, Kubrick's greatest film, How NASA and Hollywood Fooled the World. Go watch it. 8 million people already have. 8 million people. 8 million people, Jay, have seen this. And they all know what a bullshit artist you are. All right. So there's a lot of arguments about these things. Let's actually wait on this. Let's go listen to Avi Loeb, because earlier this week, Avi Loeb jumped in and wanted to do a little commentary on what he thought was on these Apollo photos. Let's go listen to Avi from last week.
That immediately hit me was photos taken by the astronauts on the Apollo missions from the moon of UFOs. Not just one photo, but there were several photos there. This speaks directly to the work that you are doing with the Galileo project, right? Looking at UAP, you're looking at interstellar objects, you're looking at the connections between UFOs and space. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so it's a broad search. We are opening a very large net that involves interstellar objects that potentially arrive into the inner solar system and are technological in nature, as well as objects that may be very close to Earth. And that's what the US government data is all about. And both of them are connected, obviously. With respect to the moon, my immediate thought was that we just had last month the Artemis 2 astronauts taking lots of photos, thousands of photos, that some of which were released, some are still in the process of being released. And they saw 6 flashes of light from impact of asteroids, rocks on the surface of the moon, but they haven't seen any lights orbiting the moon. Okay, and nowadays, of course, the cameras are far better, and their vantage point was much better than cameras on the moon itself, because they could look at the dark side of the moon as they were passing behind it, and it's easier to see flashes of light in the background of the dark side of the moon. And there was no report of an unusual source of light in their images so far. I mean, maybe some of the images that were not released yet would show it. But to me, that illustrates the fact that presumably the Apollo mission images that we see in the released files, the lights in them are either a result of reflection from the optics within the camera. Sometimes you get those, or these are flashes of light from impact of rocks on the surface of the moon that somehow shattered the moon's surface at the time that the astronauts were taking those pictures. And it's difficult to tell. I'm doing a simple calculation of the statistics of those flashes. So it's unlikely that within a distance of tens of meters, there would be an impact at the time they were taking the photos. And to me, it sounds more like a problem with the optics of the camera. I find it hard to believe that such sources of light would not be noticed since then, because the moon has been observed quite carefully.
Okay, Avi. First of all, they have been noticed since then. They have been recorded since then. There's plenty of evidence of that, which we will get into. Secondly, the idea that these are some sort of nearby impact of a rock that somehow creates a flash in the sky over the landing site is a little bit on the ridiculous side. So we have these critics making these arguments. They said Hasselblad did not modify the cameras, that you can't take photography on the moon. You have to have lead shielding to take photography on the moon. This is absolute, complete nonsense. All you have to do is go to Grok and you can ask about the radiation environment on the moon. And the bottom line is that the radiation environment is not a whole lot different from Earth. The actual exposure to the film on the moon is considerably less than it was, let's say, at Chernobyl. And basically, as you go through the data, what you see is that the film would not be damaged by the radiation. Basically, the effects of radiation on the film that was used on the moon missions during the duration of the moon missions would be the equivalent of sticking a roll of film in a closet for a year and a half and then pulling it out and using it. And as anybody who ever used film back in the days knows, back in the old days, knows, that film comes out perfect. There's never a problem. The only kind of radiation effect you would get if radiation somehow, and again, when people say radiation, they act like it's this gas, like the atmosphere all around you. It's not. Radiation is specific radioactive particles that must precisely strike in a particular spot to be registered, recorded, or have any effect on equipment or film, for that matter. And the effect is always going to be a fog effect. If you get radiation into the film or into the camera, it's going to look foggy. It's not going to be a pinpoint of light. And this is something that these retards do not know and do not understand, and which was well accounted for during the Apollo mission. So the same guy who first said it was radiation artifacts, and then said earlier, previous to that, he was arguing, oh, no, all this stuff in the sky on these photographs, which have been known about for 30, 40 years now, all of that stuff was because of the scanner that they used at NASA to scan this stuff in. So his first argument was that it was scanner noise. His second argument was that it was radiation. And now he says they're front screen projection artifacts from Stanley Kubrick filming the moon landings. Okay? That's the level of retard we are dealing with. But he's not the only one. There's also other critics, like this guy named Alex Bogie, who says, Bogue, UFO believers are circulating Apollo moon landing photos from the recent government UAP document release, claiming they show alien objects in the lunar sky. But are they really? Here's a specific example that came to light when another user pointed it out to me. The photo is AS17 147, looks like 147. 22470, taken during Apollo 17 at Taurus Littrow Valley in 1972. It shows a yellow box highlighting what the Pentagon describes as 3 lights visible above the lunar terrain. I had used this photo in a prior post and correctly pointed out that cleaner, higher resolution rescans exist. NASA and Arizona State University went back to the original film canisters kept in frozen storage at Johnson Space Center since the missions ended and rescanned everything from scratch at the highest resolution ever produced as part of the Apollo 50th anniversary project. In the rescan, the artifacts are gone. They were introduced by an older scanning and processing pipeline, not anything that was actually in the lunar sky. But then, unfortunately, he updates that. It's been pointed out to me that if you dramatically boost the brightness of the rescanned Apollo 17 photo, the artifact reappears. I did not catch that, and that is my mistake. Yes, you retard. It is your mistake. That means the artifact is there on the film. Period. Secondly, I will tell you that what you think are the original photographic negatives in the Apollo vault are not the originals. Ken Johnston Jr., who we're going to discuss in a few minutes, used to work and run the photo lab at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. He personally witnessed and has testified repeatedly that he went through the photo lab on more than one occasion and saw artists airbrushing negatives. Now, let's be fair. If you're making a press release photo from the Apollo 11 mission for, say, Life magazine or Look magazine, you're going to clean those up and airbrush them. You are, because you want them to look perfect. You're not going to have little blemishes. But you never, ever airbrush the original negatives, because that is your original scientific record. And the fact that that was done proves to you right there, shows you right there, that what you've got in the vaults today are not the originals. And there's other ways we can prove that, which we will talk about in a little bit. So the radiation argument is bullshit. The scanner artifact argument is also bullshit. The Stanley Kubrick argument is officially bullshit. So you have three arguments for how these things cannot really be there. All three are BS. All three are easily falsifiable and were falsified 30 plus years ago by Richard C. Hoagland and myself and other researchers and workers like the late Steve Troy, who was a brilliant guy. The problem is, the issue that we have here is that what people think are UFOs are not UFOs. Those are not UFOs. What you are looking at is the glint, the reflection off of artificial, localized, crystalline glass structures on the lunar surface, which are all over the place. All over the place. Now, what about the other possibility that Avi Loeb brought up, that these are lens flares? Well, Hasselblad cameras do get lens flares. Any camera can get a lens flare. Here's an example, I believe, from Apollo 11 of a Hasselblad lens flare. And you can see these two. Oh, those are UFOs. But look at this other thing here. See this hexagonal glow? That, ladies and gentlemen, is a signature Hasselblad lens flare. When a Hasselblad camera has a lens flare, you get this hexagonal shape, period, every single time. And there's dozens and dozens and dozens of photos like that. See, the astronauts were also well trained, and they were generally smart enough not to point the camera into the sun and get lens flares. So we know what lens flares look like from the Hasselblad cameras used on the moon. And what we're seeing in these other pictures ain't it. So that's what Avi Loeb thinks. But the reality is that there has been a long history of lunar anomaly investigation. One of the first was called the so-called Blair cuspids, which were these discovered by a researcher named Blair who worked at Boeing, which were these long, tall obelisks that seemed to be sticking up out of the lunar surface. And they were casting extremely long shadows. Look at the one in the middle. It's really, really long, like a giant Egyptian obelisk. Now, the argument is, well, that's just because the lunar surface is sloping downhill. That's possible, but they brought up some very interesting information. They brought up some very interesting questions that people started to ask about. Now, there were other books back early in the day, back in the 60s and 70s. There's a book called Somebody Else is on the Moon by George Leonard, which was generally pretty silly, but did find some unusual looking stuff on the rims of craters from early Apollo photography. Here's a little X-shaped thing on there. Nobody really knows what that is. It's pretty weird, though. Then comes, in the mid-1990s, 1993 and 4 to be exact, my colleague, my mentor, my co-author, Richard C. Hoagland, the Face on Mars man, who, with no new photography of Mars because NASA was basically boycotting Sidonia and the Face on Mars, decided to go on and look at the moon. So when he started to do that, he went out. Oh, by the way, there's me and Richard from a few years ago. As he started to do that, he started to give lectures about the moon on some of the things he saw. And one of the images he came across is this one. This is the well-known Apollo frame 9301. And people have said, oh, well, that's been out there forever. It's a radiation spot on the screen, as we've all on the film, as we've all heard the explanation now. That's astronaut Edgar Mitchell. This is from Apollo 14. And it's really important to appreciate that on Apollo 11, there really isn't much in the way of this artifacting. And that's because Apollo 11 landed kind of in the middle of nowhere. The purpose of Apollo 11 was to land safely, go out, walk on the moon, grab some rocks, and perform a Masonic ceremony to consecrate the moon as a Masonic temple. But that's another discussion, which Buzz Aldrin did. It wasn't until Apollo 12 and Apollo 14 and then 15, 16, and 17 that they actually began the real mission of Apollo, which is reverse engineering salvage operations on the moon of ancient alien technology. Now, what Richard did is he got 9301. Now, when people get 9301 today, they're getting the fake, scanned, and rescanned, not original, negative, or print to work from. But Richard had met a man named Ken Johnston Jr., the guy I told you about before, who actually ran the photo lab, was in charge of it at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. And he had been given 4 complete sets of all the handheld photography from the Apollo missions. Every Hasselblad slide frame that the Apollo astronauts had taken during all of the missions. Apollo 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. He was told in 1972 to destroy all of the original prints. They had 4 complete sets of first generation prints. Ken protested. He was told, no, the orders came from NASA headquarters. You are to destroy these. Unfortunately, he obeyed the orders and destroyed 3 of the sets. The 4th set he kept. A whole bunch of them he donated to Oklahoma City University, his alma mater, and unfortunately, it appears they were absconded with by a professor there who was unscrupulous. But in this particular case, Ken kept them. And the ones that he kept are completely different from the images you get now from the NASA archives. At the time, Hoagland and his team of researchers also ordered individual photographic negatives from the 9 different NASA archives out there. There were 9 of them all over the world: Hawaii, Houston, St. Louis. And what they got showed these objects on the analog film. Now, just so you know, the analog negatives were examined at a microscopic level, and there were no scratches on them. When you look at this blue light object shining through the black carpet of night, what you can see is that all around it, there is structure, vertical, horizontal, diagonal. There's something else there. Okay, let me add that to stage. Are we done with that? Yeah, I think that's the end of that. Oh gosh, I can't get past that. I had a couple other slides I really wanted to show you from that first batch. Okay, so we're going to remove that and go back to that. Okay, so this is one of Ken Johnston's frames compared to the current NASA version. And you can clearly see they're not the same. Now, we've already discounted all of the reasons why they're not the same that are conventional explanations. It's not radiation. It's not scanner artifacts. It's not Stanley Kubrick. It's not nearby impact. Even Avi Loeb says nearby impacts didn't happen. So again, look at this interesting diagonal structure from the Apollo 14 landing site and this bright blue object. Really interesting stuff. So this is Ken when he was a test pilot at Grumman and he worked at NASA testing all the spacesuits in a vacuum chamber. Not exactly fun work, but Ken did it. And Hoagland eventually went through and analyzed all these analog photos and analog negatives and found a consistency that as part of these panoramas and as part of these images, there was this structure above the Apollo 14 landing site. Now, if you go into it, there are 4 different versions of 9301 showing these different bizarre artifacts. But they are relatively consistent. Now, let me show you what radiation probably looks like. If you look at this last frame, 9279, they're almost certain that blue-green fog there, that's probably some radiation leakage. That if radiation does get in and hit a film frame, and it wouldn't be instantaneous, it would be exposure over time. That's what it might look like. It looks nothing like this. Okay, here's a close-up of the object. And again, you can see vertical and horizontal striations, almost as if there's a real physical engineered structure there. The reason why it looks like that is because there is. Here's a close-up of this diagonal buttress or whatever it is that Hoagland calls it. Again, diagonal structure, faint light coming through it, and then vertical structure, left and right. And these structures, as we went through them, as the team went through them, followed the lunar surface. Here's the original raw print mosaic. It is, remember, a photographic print. It is not a scan. These, the object below it, the picture below it, is also analog. It's not scanned into a computer. It's not Photoshop. This is what it looked like when they simply made a new negative from the existing panorama and reproduced it in 1994, before Photoshop even existed as a software. This is what they reproduced. You see this blue glow of structure in the sky, which absolutely cannot and should not be there, and it tracks the light. Notice this. Here's the sun. That's the bright area in the middle. Notice the very edges of the panorama, and imagine the panorama wraps around like this. What's going to be the brightest part of that photograph? If it was a panoramic photograph, it's going to be opposite the sun. That's exactly what you see. So the light geometry is perfect. So one of the interesting things that happened is that on Apollo 15, there was something called a stand-up EVA, where the astronaut basically stands up on the ascent stage, ascent engine cowling, and sticks his head out and looks around. They also, it turns out, did this on Apollo 12. Why did they do this? Because Apollo 12 landed right in the middle of these artificial structures. How did they know how to get through all that and not hit it and go splat like a bug on a windshield? Because they landed in the same location that Surveyor 4 had landed in 33 months previously. Here's a shot, photographic shot from the Apollo 15 stand-up EVA. Now, why would they do this? They did this because although Apollo 11 was symbolic, landed in the middle of nowhere, Apollo 12 was right down among them, as Ed Mitchell said, or did say on Apollo 10. They got up, they looked around. Whatever they saw bothered them enough that the first thing that Al Bean did when he descended down the ladder and took the camera off the camera stand is point it directly at the sun, the exact thing he'd been trained not to do, and burn the optics out. So we only got about 35 or 40 minutes of color TV from the lunar surface on Apollo 12. Why? Well, because Apollo 12 was a very interesting place. Now, NASA put out a film after Apollo, 16 millimeter film with sound for libraries and schools, called Pinpoint for Science, the story of Apollo 12, how they landed in exactly the same location as Surveyor 4. Surveyor 4, Surveyor 3, I forget. So what did my colleague and brilliant partner, Richard Hoagland, do? He got the film. And he had a negative made from the positive. And then he overexposed the background. And when he did that, guess what showed up? The same diagonal structures over the Apollo 12 landing site as had appeared over the Apollo 12 landing site. Apollo 12 and Apollo 14 had the same structures visible over the horizon. How's that possible? It's possible because the two landing sites were only 100 miles apart. And what you are looking at here, this huge diagonal structure, miles high glass crystalline structure, is somewhere between the Apollo 12 and Apollo 14 landing sites, somewhere distant off to the horizon, and was captured on two different missions from two different locations on two completely different film mediums. The Hasselblad slide film from Apollo 14 and the 16 millimeter motion picture film from Apollo 12. So you now have the same artifacts from two different perspectives with two completely different mediums. This is proof, flat out proof, that that structural object, that huge diagonal buttress or whatever you want to call it, was really there and is really there and was photographed by 2 separate Apollo missions. Case closed. Now, when Richard Hoagland got into this, he started looking at the middle part of the moon. Why did he start looking at the middle part of the moon? Well, because when you look up at the sky and the moon, you see a crater called Oort, which is a triangular shaped crater. Later Clementine images showed that it is a beat up triangle, but it's a triangle. Craters do not form into triangles. And what became very obvious was that they were very interested. NASA was very interested on the earlier Surveyor and Apollo and Lunar Orbiter missions in the Sinus Medii region, the sea in the middle. They took all kinds of photographs of it. And when you look at the photographs from Sinus Medii, it's easy to see why. This is a frame from Lunar Orbiter 3. It's frame 384M. I dare anybody to explain this in terms of radiation or Stanley Kubrick or scanner artifacts. 384M. Everything here seems pretty normal. That's a little bit of developer flop there at the top. But as you go through and look at this image and scan up close to the horizon, it gets more and more interesting. And by the way, the original Apollo frames are much clearer than this. My streaming software has downgraded this. But as you zoom up, you begin to see something that shouldn't be there. This object right here, sticking up out of the ground. Now, that is a camera artifact or a RESO mark, a registration mark. This foggy thing back here shouldn't be there either. But this is sticking up out of the surface of the moon, and it is casting a shadow across the lunar landscape. Now, how do you explain that one? If this thing is not really there and it is 1.5 miles high, if it's not really there, how is it casting a shadow on the lunar surface? And when you get even closer and do even more enhancement, and again, these are not scans, they're scanned in eventually, but these are photographic, these are analog prints made in 1993 and 1992. This is the object that Richard Hoagland called the shard. And as you zoom up on it, it's got kind of a bowling pin shape to it. And it has a cellular structure. There's all these little hexagonal, equally sized shapes, cells all over this thing. This is a battered, shattered glass shell structure that has been beaten down by billions of years, millions of years at least, of incessant meteoric rain. Behind that is another object, which could also be a smudge or maybe it's radiation. But as you zoom up on this object called the tower, it's over 7 miles high by calculations. And it too has a cellular glass-like geometric structure, which is basically impossible to explain naturally. There are even support struts coming off of it, holding this enormous thing up. What is it? I don't know. Command center, starbase. I don't know. But you know what? You know how we know this isn't a radiation smudge? Because in the exact same location, on the exact same geometry, from the side, AS10 324856, there it is. Still reflecting light. still showing 7 miles above the lunar surface. It's there. It's real. And you can't explain it away. It's that simple. Sinus Meta E was a very interesting place. Here's a shot from Surveyor 6, which landed in November of 1967. And after the sunset, they took a photo of the horizon, and you see these glowing beads on the horizon. Now, that shouldn't be there because the moon has no atmosphere, so you should have a sharp edge. This almost looks like there's atmosphere in between it. It's like watching a sunset. And what is all this left and right diagonal structure from the TV camera? We now have motion picture film, we have slide film, and we have a TV broadcast showing this glowing structure that the light is passing through. Again, it cannot be there unless there is an intervening medium between the light source and the camera. And it also can't be there unless the light is being bent around the lunar surface, because this shot was taken after local sundown. So Hoagland was curious, and he got himself a North American catalog of Apollo photography. And a lot of it was just really bad. Look at how dark these are. And there's one in the middle, AS10 32 48 22, which is completely black. Wow, they leave the lens cap on Apollo? It's an Apollo 10 handheld photograph. It's a Hasselblad picture. So Hoagie by this time is a little bit suspicious of NASA. He's been dealing with them for 20 years. So you know what he did? He ordered the blacked out photograph. And what do you think he got? He got this. He got AS10 32 48 22. See how it's black here? But in real life, no, it's a shot of Sinus Meta E from Apollo 10 of a very interesting area right in the sea in the middle. Now, there are geologists like Dr. Bruce Cornett who've gone through this and talked about the linear structure here and the cross-hatching structure, which he says is artificial and looks exactly like a city, and I concur with that. But as they ordered this photograph from the 9 different archives, they kept noticing that there was a lot of weird stuff on it. They also noticed that some of these artifacts were only visible in one version, but not in another. So what they quickly realized is that there were actually 9 different versions of AS10 32 48 22. So what actually happened was the spacecraft was moving this way. The astronaut had his camera looking out the optically perfect windows of Apollo 11 or Apollo 10 and hit the power, had a power winder on, hit the button and went click, 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 click. And as he did, these objects, which were see-through and reflecting light, bounced the light into the film in the camera. And you could see artifacts form and then disappear. This, I call it the paperclip, is one of them. It's only visible on one frame. It's casting a shadow. Hey, Avi, you going to tell me that's radiation? Stanley Kubrick make that? There's another object hanging in the sky, again, attached to this lattice work of structure. Hoagland called it the castle because it looked a little bit like the Disney castle. And it's literally hanging amongst all of these little bits of shattered glass structure, reflecting light back at the camera as the spacecraft moves through space and the photographs are taken. There are 2 frames which show the castle, 2 48-22s which show the castle. In one of them, You can even see the drooping guy wire going through the peak of it, which is holding it up in this glass structure. Close-ups show again the same internal glass-like cellular structure. So, of course, Hoagland got excited. He started ordering other frames. Here's a frame, AS1032 4810. Looks fairly normal, but again, you can see some weird stuff on it. Oh, must be a dirty negative. This negative, by the way, has now been completely whitewashed. All this stuff is gone. So what did Hoagie do? Well, he just stuck it on a light board and turned the light up. Boom. Regular light. Regular light. They had negatives made of these, and it showed what was visible. Sorry, they got the negatives from the archives, and this is what was on the negatives. Notice the, again, geometric structure. Notice that the lines follow the structural curvature of the moon. Notice that the vertical lines are vertical to the horizon. And this one, you just get into this one. There's box-like structures inside of it. These intersecting lines here, structural reinforcement. I'm a structural engineer. It's what I did at Boeing and Northrop Grumman and Bombardier. This is structure. This is engineering. Look at there's lines near the top that cross each other. They're reinforcing, they're attaching, they're supporting. Do different colors, get different effects, see things you didn't see in the previous frame. All there, all above the lunar surface. Here's 32, 48, 16. Lighten that one up, that negative up on the light board. And again, not scanners, not done with scanners. Analog negatives under light boards. Printed out. Prints were then scanned. This stuff was all there and is all there on the analog frames. Check out these skyscrapers here. How tall are those suckers? 2, 3, 4 miles. Look at the end. Does that look like a radiation blur? Nope. Does that look like a scanner artifact? Fuck no. It's not even close to anything that looks like that. Does that look like, I don't know, Stanley Kubrick's artwork? No, it looks nothing like that. So what is it? It's a towering, relatively see-through, probably clear crystalline glass structure on the moon in the region of Sinus Medae. That's what it is. And there's more. Let's keep going now and look at more close-ups of 4816. Again, it's stunning stuff. Look at this guy right in the middle. This goes straight across, and then a cross beam comes in. If you look at the right center, lower right center, you see that one glittering kind of line going through the image, a little bit of a curvature, and then you see an intersecting line. It's normal. It's 90 degrees. Okay, but that's just a scratch. It's just by accident. Just a scratch on the negative. So what did they do then? Well, Hoagland hired an architect, Robert Feartecker. He volunteered. And he took some of these images and he took every pinpoint of light and he put them in to a coordinate system, 3D coordinate system in a computer, which in 1994 was incredibly time consuming and incredibly expensive. And using a high-end computer, they then took that data and had it spit out. Grok could now do this in 20 seconds. Had it spit out what it thought the shape, the three-dimensional shape of all this was. And this is what it came up with way back in like 1994, before Photoshop, for any of this. It is a gigantic glass crystalline grid over the lunar surface. Why would you do that? It's a meteor shield. There's no atmosphere on the moon. But glass, lunar glass, is much stronger than glass on Earth. It's basically almost shatterproof. Why? Because it has no moisture. It's the moisture in the glass on Earth that makes it shatter when a baseball hits it. On the moon, there's no moisture in the glass because there's no moisture on the moon to speak of. So it becomes the perfect malleable, lightweight material to build a meteor shield out of. In fact, NASA, SpaceX, is planning on building their habitats on the moon out of lunar glass for exactly that reason. Okay, do we see this stuff anywhere else? Well, yeah, this is an interesting case. This is Apollo 16, orbit 121, frame 19438 of a region called Mare Crisium. Again, you see the Hasselblad flare in the middle. And you see this very rough, weird-looking landscape. But what's this thing here in the left middle? This white thing sticking straight up? What is that? It's called the spire. That's what we commonly call it now. It's a couple of miles over the surface, and as you can see, there are actual right angle guy wires supporting it. It's relatively similar to the so-called tower in Sinus Medii. But now when you go to the new NASA archive, the official NASA archive, and pull it up, it's gone. Oh my God. Oh my God. As David Hancher Childress would say, it's gone. Where did the spire go? You can still see some of the guy wire supports, but they took it out in the new scans. Here, gone. Here, gone. Here, gone. Now, why is it in one frame and not another? Because this one, the original one, the one that Richard Hoagland had handed to him, was pilfered off the desk of the NASA director in 1972 by a guy who had a meeting with him, saw it, knew what it was, and stuck it in his briefcase. There's a whole bunch of pictures there. He swiped it. That's the only reason we have this original print, which tells us the truth of what's really up there. Now, there's some really interestingly weird other craters around. Proculus is one of them, or Proclus. Here's a Earth-based telescope image of Proclus, just outside Mare Crisium. Notice the color. Isn't that interesting? How colorful. The moon's not supposed to be colorful like that, is it? Here's another shot of Proclus. Doesn't really look like a crater. Looks kind of different. Al Warden talked about the ejecta from Proclus kind of crosses Crisium in a weird way. It's almost like flying above a haze layer and looking down through the haze. It looks like it's suspended over it, he said, because that's exactly what you're looking at, Al, is this structure suspended over it. Here's an interesting crater in the same image. Here's some with structural supports underneath them. Those are satellite dishes. Here's another satellite dish. Here's the lower structure underneath the dish compared to an earthbound dish. Same thing. I can go on like this for a long time. I got lots of these. Here's some Apollo 12 stuff. But one of the really interesting things about this theory is that you have to account for is the human factor. Al Bean was the fourth man to walk on the moon on Apollo 12. He was also an artist. And when he returned to the Earth, he painted the moon. He painted the greatest adventure of his life. And he had his paintings featured in Air and Space magazine. He had them on the cover of Air and Space, which was a big deal back then. And he was a well-known and well-respected space artist. So what NASA has always told you the moon looks like is this. This is Buzz Aldrin from Apollo 11. It's great. Notice there's no radiation leaks popping through on that one. Nope, no radiation there. Because it's not radiation. Because there was hardly anything around Apollo 11. But it's this gray, colorless, bland surface. But Bean saw it differently. When he painted the moon, what he painted was bright colors, pinks and lavenders and aquamarines and blue and weird colors that were very different from what we saw on film and television. And what he began to do is to do his masterpiece, his self-portrait on the moon. This is what he got. But he was unsatisfied with it. It didn't look right. It didn't feel right. It was too gray. So he kept working on it. Eventually, he came up with 4 different versions. And the version he finally settled on was this one. 1994. Look at all that. Orange, pink, some blue, some lavender. That doesn't look like the moon. Why would he do it that way? Well, if you look at the Apollo 14 photographs, here's the famous one, the one we've been talking about, 9301. Here's the raw color. You enhance the color. It looks just like Al Bean's art view, doesn't it? At least I think it does. Why? Because what's happening is if you have crystalline structures, glass structures above these landing sites, the light is going to come in, it's going to hit them, and it's going to act like a prism. And when that happens, the light sources blend. You get not just red, green, and blue. You get pink and purple and lavender and pastel and magenta and bright yellow. You get all the colors of the rainbow. Here is Ken Johnston's 9301. Here's the Apollo 14 landing site. All you do is turn up the color volume, turn up the saturation a little bit, and it suddenly looks like. Here's an actual photograph. Suddenly looks like Al Bean's portrait, doesn't it? Looks exactly like what Bean painted. So is he trying to tell you something, or is it that he just couldn't remember? I don't know. Here's an Earth-based telescopic photograph of the moon. And what do you notice about it? It's got all these same colors. Why? Because the lunar surface is covered with these artificial glass structures. And unfortunately, the brightness of the moon tends to wash this color out. But when you play around with it a little bit, what you see is the moon is actually a far more colorful place than you've been taught to believe. Far more colorful. These are all telescopic observations of the moon. That's Aristarchus, I think. Look at that. Absolutely incredible. Now, we can confirm this because of other missions, like Surveyor 1, which had a TV camera, not a telescope, not a film camera, not a digital camera, a TV camera. And it landed on the lunar surface. And when it broadcast back its color TV images, this is what it looked like. Yellow, pink, purple, blue. You can even see the little color dial there to coordinate it. And when you coordinate the red, green, blue, the moon gets very, very bright, very, very colorful, very, very different. Here's Apollo 17, a photograph of the orange soil. Notice the lavender at the top of the screen and the pink. Where's that coming from? It's coming from those artificial glass structures that the Pentagon showed you pictures of, little reflections of, about a week and a half ago. Here's the Apollo 17 Shorty Crater panorama. This is what NASA shows you it looks like. This is what it really looks like. Pink, purple, blue, lavender, magenta. The moon is not boring. The moon is an exciting place with many, many, many weird things going on. Even Carl Sagan knew this stuff existed. In his book Cosmos, on page 84, he shows a picture of the lunar surface. Doesn't say which photograph it is. I think we found it. I think Hoagland eventually found it, or Steve Troy did. And in it is a bright flashing pole thing sticking up out of the surface. Now, this next picture, for some reason, the StreamYard software doesn't absorb it. I have a much better, higher resolution image of this. This is, again, not a blemish. This is a long streak of bright light sticking up out of the lunar surface. Sagan knew this. Sagan saw it. Sagan saw everything on his images. So he knew it very well, what this was, when he stuck it in his book. So, what are these things? Some of them are like towers. Here's the crater Mersenius E, with a tall tower casting a shadow out of the middle of it. You can find stuff like this all over lunar photography. The closer you get to the original images, the more you will see. Some other shots of it. This, by the way, these are probably all parts of lunar bases. This, by the way, if you ever see this screen cap on the internet, I want you to know it's mine. I took it with a device called a Snappy, which is the only way you could do a screen capture back in the 1990s. And I'm the one who put this graphic on here, put this Chiron on here. Gisny von Braun from the Man and the Moon special at 33 degrees, by the way. It's not a real picture of a moon base. It's from a Disney production, but it's my screen cap, just so everybody knows. Well, if these things were really there, wouldn't the Russians see all these structures? Yeah, they did. There was a probe called Zond 3. Zond 3 took a bunch of pictures of the moon as it passed around the Mare Orientale region, and it caught some really interesting things, at least a couple interesting things. Notice along the lunar limb here, you've got this giant, I don't know, something sticking out of there. What is that? It's a tower, mile or two high. Made of what? I don't know. Look at all this stuff next to it. I don't know what that is either, but it looks like it's artificial construction. What are all these things sticking up? Nothing should be sticking up out of the lunar surface. Nothing like this, because meteors should have beaten it all down a long time ago. Long time ago. Apparently they didn't. Here's another shot from Zon 3. That's the footpad on the left. What's that thing in the lower right-hand corner? Well, it's some sort of structural dome. What's it doing there? It can't be there. If the moon is what NASA says it is, none of this can be there. None of this. Isn't anybody else looking at this stuff? Yeah. I have a friend named Alan Sturm who works very hard. He wrote a great book called Anomalies. And he has gone through and looked at various NASA photographs. Here's AS17 151 23260. Also, this is a really good picture of the power generators on Hoth. That's what that is. There's structure everywhere in these pictures if you look at these different craters. What are those 6 half-buried wheeled things there? 5. What are they? Generators? I don't know. Maybe. I'll tell you one thing. They're not craters. They're not mountains. Here's another satellite dish type thing. Oh, that's pretty nondescript. Well, color it in a little bit. Gets more interesting, doesn't it? Alan's really good at this. Another, nothing lunar landscape. Well, guess what? Why are these so blurry? Because they're at extreme range. They're taken by moving spacecraft using 1960s technology. All that stuff there is structural. What's this weird donut looking thing? Again, the power generators. That is regular geometric spoked wheeled structure. They're at least 100 feet across, I would think. Probably bigger than that. There's nothing that can explain that. And as of right now, or as of a little while ago, they were still in the photographic catalogs. Want to see an ocean liner on the moon? There it is right there. Left middle of the picture. Looks like a boat. I don't know what all this stuff is, but it's not natural. It's not natural terrain. Alan is a genius at finding this stuff. Notice how you didn't see this little sphere. There's the sphere. We have the sphere here in Vegas. They got one on the moon, too. Oh, it doesn't look like much. Oh, well, wait a minute. Maybe it kind of looks like a hangar. A warehouse. Underground warehouse. I don't know. Something. Oh, look. Here's something buried. Here's like a big gear buried on the lunar surface. Yep. Let's go back and look at that a little bit more. Pipes and tubes and stuff everywhere. I don't know what this is. Maybe a sphinx. Don't know. Again, more artificial structure on the surface. And one of my favorite missions is Apollo 17. Because on Apollo 17, they landed at 19.5 degrees, which if you know my research and Richard Hoagland's research, that's very significant. And there was a really interesting sort of depression, V-shaped depression there called Nansen, which they were very interested in. But they took a lot of high-resolution photos and film of the mountains surrounding them. And when you look at these mountains, I mean, gosh, they're like Condos. That's not a mountain. That's a condo. Streets, layers, block houses. Looks like a development here in Summerlin. A couple of miles away from where the rover is at that point. And then later, an Italian researcher sent us Italian versions from an Italian archive of close-up photos of these mountains. And they had bizarre wire-like tubing. Look at this. This is actually laying over this mountain. Oh, that must be some of Stanley Kubrick's rigging, right? No. It's glass. It's see-through because look at it. Reflects the light. Brighter in the sunlight, darker in the shade. You look at the NASA version of this, that stuff is whitewashed out. Absolutely whitewashed out. You even look at the base of it, and there's a little hook there connecting it. Comes from these Italian versions showing this artificial structure. Even this one has a hole punched in it. Now here's the so-called hexagonal mountain, the South Massif. Looks like the back end has been blown out in some sort of internal explosion. And on day 2, they went right there to the South Massif, to this Nansen area, and they looked around. They found a lot of interesting stuff, and then they went on to a crater called Shorty Crater. Well, what did they find in Shorty Crater? Well, if you look at the interior of these panoramas, what looks like a bunch of rocks and debris starts to look, I don't know, a little bit more mechanical. That looks like a clevis fitting to me. That looks like some piping and tubing. I don't think that's a rock. And I really don't think that is a rock, because if you look at it and you layer together 4 or 5 of the panoramas, turns out it has 2 eyes, a nose, and a red stripe, and a head shape. I mean, this sucker is, I don't know, Elon, to give you some ideas, looks like C-3PO's head to me. And guess what? Yeah, it's exactly the same size as a human head. Now, some people like to go, oh, why is it all green like that? Well, because, again, you have this light scattering going on over the lunar surface. Here's some examples of Apollo 16 rover shots. What's that? Some sort of mechanism. It ain't a rock. I don't know what it is, but it's not a rock. So if any of this were real, then wouldn't the Chinese see the same thing? Well, guess what? The Chang 3 mission landed on the backside of the moon, and they took pictures. And they included a lot of horizon in those pictures. And what did they see? Oh, I guess they saw more radiation spots. They saw the exact same glass-like reflective structures and pinpoints of light that we would expect if Hoagland's model was real. Exactly the same. You can even see how this wall of glass structure, it tails off as the sun tails off. It follows the geometry of the sun. That proves that this is not a digital artifact. If this was digital artifacting, it would be all over the whole image. It's only on the sky, in the sky, above the landing site. And it follows the geometry of the sun. Here's an inverted version of it to make it even clearer. I suspect the rest of this image, the blanker part, looks more like the part on the right. It's just that the sunlight is not hitting it correctly. So why don't we see this from orbit? When we do, there's TLPs. This is an example from the space station. What you're seeing here is you're seeing the hard surface of the moon, and then this bright glowing green thing, that's the air glow layer of the Earth. That's the atmosphere. Now, we all know the moon has no atmosphere. None. Therefore, there is no air glow layer. Therefore, when we look at the horizon of the moon, we should see only one thing. We should see a hard, sharp edge. But when we look at pictures like the moonrise picture, sunrise, or the earthrise picture, we see all this hazy stuff around it. Like there's something between the camera and the target, which is the horizon and the earth beyond. When we enhance these pictures, we see that there's all kinds of bright, vertical, structural looking stuff below the earth. But the real killer is this one. AS 1588 12013. If the moon is what they tell us it is, there has to be nothing but a hard edge there, just like Dr. Loeb they saw from Artemis. But on Apollo 15, this is a trans-Earth injection photo. What's all this glowing stuff here? Why is it not consistent? If this is just a brightness artifact, why does it trail off here? Why does it get thinner and then get thicker? This can only be one of two things. It can either be that the moon has an atmosphere, which I highly doubt, or it's the glass structures that I've been telling you about for the last hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it's been, hour and a half. It can't be anything else. You want to see some glass domes on the moon? Here's one Steve Troy found. This is I forget the frame number, but I've got it in my book. It's a shot across Mare Crisium. Do a little enhancement on this. You can see the second dome behind the first dome. You can see through it. It's like a watch crystal. It's near Picard crater. Here's a complex near Hortensius C. And then we get to the last little bit. The Daedalus ziggurat near Daedalus C, a crater on the backside of the moon. This photograph is not digitized. Well, it's been scanned, but it comes from an analog photograph given to a researcher named KK Samurai back in 1999 from a guy named Frank. Frank's dad worked at NASA. Like many other employees, Frank's dad got stacks of 8x10 first generation print glossies from the Apollo missions. This was one of them. And in it, it contained not necessarily a pyramid, but what I refer to as a ziggurat. It could not more obviously be artificial. Here's some enhancement that was done by the History Channel. Now, it took quite a while to sort through and figure out in 2013, 2014, what image this came from. And it turns out it came from AS 11 38 55 64. So it was Apollo 11, 38th orbit, frame number 5564. This is after trans-Earth injection. And when you go to the website now, the digital website, which Alex Bogey and those clowns claim, oh, that's from the perfect originals. Suddenly, what was there originally, what was there on the prints that were made in 1969, all of a sudden in 2014 is gone. It's just erased. It's just a bunch of craters. But one of the mistakes they made is they erased the pyramid. It's right there. But they didn't look at the rest of the picture. I did. And as you look around AS 1138 5564, you see a lot of weird looking stuff. Weird little space planes. You see tanks kind of looking things casting weird shadows. But my favorite area is up in the upper corner of the image, up there at the top. Doesn't look like much from far away, but when you really begin to look at what's there, you see a couple of platforms, multi-layered beach house maybe. You see some weird obelisks sticking up out of the ground. But on the right is the most interesting thing you see. What you see is a disc-shaped craft, probably 100 feet across, with landing gear, sticking into a hangar or bunker that was cut into the side of the mountain. Let's go back. See how that's square, that's cut out, and inside of it is a flying saucer. Explain that one to me in terms of radiation or scanner artifacts or Stanley Kubrick. I'll give you a hint. You can't, because that's not what it is. It's a real object photographed from the moon by the Apollo astronauts. Period. So that, folks, is what's really on the moon. Like it or not, stick it in your ear, stick it in your pipe and smoke it. That is what is really, really on the moon. There is one other point I wanted to make. There is a post, a social media post. Let me see if I can find it. Let me see if I can find it. Oh yeah, this one. Grant Tremblay. Okay. Let's do a share screen here. Grant Tremblay says, well, you know that these blue blobs and stuff, you know that they're artifacts, they're radiation, because you can see them in other photos. So let's do a share screen and explain to Grant why he's wrong. Let's take a look at this. Here is a lunar surface photograph. Okay. Little blue dot right there. Oh, must be radiation on the film, right? Must be. Go to the next one. Oh, look, another little blue dot circled. It's got to be radiation, right? This proves the radiation theory, by the way. Oh, there's another little blue dot and another bright dot in the sky. Several other bright dots. And then I don't know what he's pointing out in the last one. He's got one in the sky. He's claiming this one thing is that's the antenna on the back of the Pliss. So I don't know what he thinks that is. Then he claims there's something on the helmet, but I looked on the helmet and I can't see anything on the helmet. I can't see a little blue dot. So he's claiming that these are radiation artifacts, proving the radiation artifact theory, which we've already disproven. No, they're not. If you look at those images, what you see are all from the ground. A couple of them are on the lunar module. None of them appear to be on the spacesuit. So what are they? I'll explain it to you what they are. The lunar surface is made up of glass aluminum, and titanium. And glass, aluminum, and titanium are highly reflective. So when the sunlight hits them and somebody takes a picture, there are a few tiny little specks that have, they reflect like, I don't know, like a silver dollar. See how it gets brighter like that? As you shift it, that's called the phase angle. I'm shifting the phase angle of the coin to reflect the light directly into the camera lens. That's what those are. Little tiny particles of aluminum, titanium, and or glass reflecting light into the lens. So as we've explained, the ones in the sky can't be radiation film damage, and the ones on the ground have other easy explanations. Period. So what do we conclude from all this? We can conclude safely that the lunar photography that was presented by the Pentagon last week are legitimate mysteries. Absolutely legitimate mysteries. They have been looked at for more than 30 years by much brighter people than the critics who are trying to explain them away. None of the explanations, none of them explain what we see in these photographs. Most of these photographs that have been controversial for so long are in fact analog. They're not even scanned. The film damage notion is refuted by the scientific papers and the physical visual evidence. So if it's not Stanley Kubrick, which is ridiculous, if it's not radiation, which is ridiculous because none of it looks like radiation or acts like it's radiation damage, and it is not front screen projection, and it's not scanner artifacts, then what is it? It's what I just showed you. It's a flying saucer on the moon. It's extraterrestrial technology. I'm not going to say alien because extraterrestrial means not of this earth because it's on the moon. But it's really there. We really went. And we really found stuff. And now it's time to investigate it. All right, let's take a couple questions, see if there's anybody that's got anything intelligent to say. Mike Clory, hi, how are you, McClure? Walks like a duck, quacks like a duck. Greetings, fellow truthers. That guy has reptile eyes. I'm not sure which one you're talking about. Stanley Kubrick's 2001 movie showed us moonscapes that looked the way we wanted the moon to look. Yeah, the real footage is completely different. There's no comparison between what Kubrick created and what the moon actually looks like. Good afternoon. Lunar landforms are more rounded because of millennia of micrometeor impacts. That's correct. The incessant meteoric rain that Richard Hoagland talked about. The Hasselblad cameras were very expensive and were state of the art. The metal structure of the camera itself would have blocked the alpha and beta radiation. Also true. Also true. In order for there to be radiation damage on these films, and some of them are in the exact same place, by the way, you have to have a tiny, tiny, tiny little aperture. You have to have a radioactive particle go right through that aperture and strike in exactly the right place. It's ridiculous. It didn't happen. If they would have gotten a decent picture of anything besides specs, folks would be able to spin these yarns about exposure to debunk them. Hopefully we get a clear shot of something. Well, I hope, Dante, that a flying saucer on the moon was good enough for you. Did Arthur C. Clarke ever comment on the fake moon landing story? Not that I know of. I don't believe he ever did. Was there ever a follow-up investigation to the Blair cuspids? Not really. Blair put out a paper, but he was attacked. With all due respect, Mike, without irrefutable evidence and proof, maybe you should stop calling half your supporters retards. Maybe you're a little retarded, seeing as you haven't gone to space. Okay, I just shoved the proof right down your throat. The flying saucer's there, although I'm sure they're furiously going to be erasing it now off of 5564. Did I personally witness any of this? Calling critical thinkers retarded. You're not critical thinkers. You're stupid. You buy into bullshit like Stanley Kubrick faked the moon landings from creeps like Jay. Be more discerning. And I have shoved the proof right down your throat today, by the way, Frank. Apollo 11 had to maneuver the lander to avoid the structures upon descent. That's not entirely true. What is true is that, remember the 1202 alarm? There's the famous, we got the 1202 alarm. What are we going to do? We have to have the woman, come in and fix the computer program. The reason the 1202 alarm went off is because Buzz Aldrin turned on, there was a docking radar and a descent radar. Buzz turned them both on. Why? Because he was trying to avoid hitting what might be out there. And there was some structural stuff around Apollo 11, but the reason that site was picked is because there was very little in the way of visible glass structure there. Yep. Wall works and other artifacts on the moon in the 1830s. Goes back to the 1500s. Well, other astronomers couldn't verify his observations because you have to be looking at the moon at the right time when the sun hits this pane of glass to reflect the light into your eye or into whatever image you're looking at. Or imaging software you're using or camera. Yeah, they would be in danger. And they have now, I think, mapped it out fairly close. What I don't like is when each anomaly is treated as an isolated event. That's called reductionism, and they do that to try to break down the argument. I'm going to pick what I think is the weakest aspect of this argument, and I'm going to attack that, because if I can attack that, then I can claim that the whole thing is invalid. That's how they do it. That's how skeptics have always done it. Reminds me of the over-horizon radar antenna were constructed. Yep. If there was a moon city on Earth's moon during the antediluvian age, which is what Hoagland and Barrow want us to believe, what purpose would it have served? I don't know, but that's a second level question. Nobody gives a shit. I don't care. What difference does that make? The only thing that matters is whether it was there or not. If it was there, history is not what they've told us. Have I ever found the entrances to the inner moon? No, I can't say I've found those. Those are not stars, Joe. No. They've attempted to argue that too, that dust is floating up from a static electric charge. No. Elon could send some rovers there. Yep, he could. Thank you, Joe. Love you, man. buddy, you're like retarded. You are. I call people retards. You're like the kind of guy that I call a retard because you're retarded. You just don't want to accept what's right in front of your face, bro. Just accept it. Just give in. It's okay. Life's still going to go on. Seahawks are still going to play. Still going to win the Super Bowl. It's okay. Let's see. Okay. Bye-bye. Okay. So was the moon landing true? Absolutely, it was true. But they didn't, the secrecy was because of what they were investigating. How'd you like the DJT video with the Grace and handcuffs? Well, that's where they deserve to be, because I don't like the fucking Grace suck. All right, guys, that is going to wrap it up. I hope this cleared things up for you. Please pass this along to your friends. If anybody has any other thoughts, I'm interested. I'm not gonna promise I'm not gonna call you a retard if you think Stanley Kubrick faked the moon landings or the fake alien mummies from Peru are real. I'm not gonna promise that, but I will look at other explanations. But been in this a long time, and the important thing to remember is that these things, these objects, did not show up on scanners. They showed up on real analog film. And they're confirmed about 15 different ways, including Al Bean's eyewitness accounts. All right, guys, thank you for your time. I appreciate you very much. And I will see you on later tonight on Toxically Masculine Tuesday with the boys. Tune in. Same bat time, same bat channel. Bye-bye.